Hey LAFC, here it is. Spring is finally starting to arrive. And hopefully you've taken advantage of some of the good weather and sunshine we've had and to get yourself in a good mental and physical and yes, even spiritual place of mind. And so I know that I've been taking advantage of it as well. It helps me clear my head, my thoughts, and engaging my family out on the trails and seeing many of you actually out on the rail trails passing by, and it's been a pleasure to do that. This season has been very strange. I would say the first few months were the first few weeks strange, but nothing like what it is now. I think we've all been conditioned to the federal leadership and the state leadership not being in alignment. We've lived our lives with that shifting all the time. But I don't know that any of us have ever experienced such a dichotomy of vision that we currently are experiencing between local elected officials and state elected officials. And it's really created a challenge for what should we do. We're having to make decisions like that for the church. You're probably having to make decisions like that for your businesses or your own household. The question becomes, what should we do? Who should we listen to? How should we proceed? What would God have us to do? And you know, as a church, we're making decisions, trying to discern what is best on behalf of our people. Since the state of Pennsylvania has no restrictions on churches, we recognize that gives us a clear opportunity we could meet, but we're voluntarily choosing not to right now, trying to care best for the people of our church and to meet needs during this season without compromising anybody's personal health. However, the longer we go, those questions only grow, and so we are looking at when would be the wisest time to go, and so what are the biblical principles we're going to have to use in that decision? What are some biblical principles you could use in your paradigm of how to make a decision for your household or your business in a manner that you would say glorifies God? About 9 years ago, when I first started at LAFC, I preached a sermon about making decisions when the Bible doesn't give clarity. Now, biblically, you can find principles to speak to everything, but there are many things that with other than a biblical principle, the Bible doesn't directly deal with. So it doesn't tell us how to respond to conflicts of leadership between two authority figures that are over us, especially during a pandemic, or how to handle your household when you're not sure if it's safe to go or not safe to go, and what should you do on behalf of your relationships with other people and your business and so on. And so since the Bible doesn't address that specifically, what are the biblical principles that we can apply in our current context? And so in a sermon 9 years ago, I shared this text and a story of when I was a teenager. I got to hear Andy Stanley, who's now a mega church pastor down in Atlanta, preach a sermon as a youth pastor. He was a youth pastor speaking at a youth conference I was at, and he shared this phrase that I've never forgotten, and I shared it with LAFC several years ago, and that is, there is good and there is bad, but that is not our cue, but rather what is the wise thing to do. He made us repeat that phrase multiple times throughout his message, that there is good and there is bad, but that is not our cue, but rather what is the wise thing to do. Too often we're looking at what's good, what's bad, and that's very black and white, but so much isn't clear black and white, and so how do you handle the middle, that gray area? And it really requires, what is the wisest thing to do? Now, what I found, biblically speaking, that helps guide me when it's gray is this passage out of 1 Corinthians 10, starting in verse 23. And it says this: I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. So eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. If any unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever is put before you without raising questions of conscience. But if someone says to you that this has been offered as a sacrifice, then do not eat it, both for your sake and for the sake of the one who invited you. I am referring to the other person's conscience, not yours. For why is my freedom to be judged by another's conscience? If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? So whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God, even as I try to please everyone in every way. For I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. So follow this example as I follow the example of Christ. So in this text, I'm just going to go straight at it. It basically says, I have the right to do anything. But that doesn't mean that everything I may do is beneficial. And then he says it again, I have the right to do anything, but not necessarily everything is going to be constructive. Then he says in verse 24, you should not seek your own good, but the good of others. So what I've done is I've taken this text as saying, okay, basically Paul is writing to the church of Corinth saying, yes, we have freedom. But in that freedom, we need to ask ourselves, is it beneficial or is it harmful to others? Then I ask the question, is it constructive or destructive to others? Because he says in verse 24, again, we shouldn't seek our own good, but the good of others. So we have freedom, but in light of that freedom, and we're trying to make sure that we make our decisions for the good of others, we have to ask ourselves, like this text says, is it beneficial or harmful, or is it constructive or destructive for others' sake? And then when you go into the rest of the text, where it's talking about how that freedom plays out in our exchange with other people, he's basically, again, relying upon that make sure that we are not hindering our relationships with other people, not so that we can be popular with them or serve them in a manner that makes us look good, but it literally concludes with, so that by the good that I do with them, it may lead to them being saved. So our decision-making paradigm isn't so much about impressing people, it's for the advantage of making sure that we're pursuing it for the benefit of other people, not to the harm of other people, doing it to the constructivity for others, not to their destruction. And so I'm making my decisions based on how this advances the gospel. And then if there still seems like, man, I can't answer the question if it's beneficial or harmful or constructive or destructive, he says this, he says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. And so it really comes down to, in whatever decisions we make, as a church leadership, deciding when do we start gathering people on site again. How can we best glorify God? How can we best do this where it's beneficial and not harmful? How can we best do this when it is not destructive but constructive? We want to lay this out in a manner that is for the benefit of others, for the good of others, even though I am so excited and motivated to get everybody back on site here, but I recognize that the gospel is not hindered by walls. It's not kept in by walls. Our lives as followers of Christ can go anywhere. And so if there is an allowance for us to just be patient, then for the sake and benefit of other people and for the sake of being constructive in society, we can make those decisions, and it's not wrong. We're doing so voluntarily, especially because there are no restrictions on churches. And you as a household are making decisions. Like, you might have the freedom to make certain decisions, but consider then, how is your decision going to benefit or harm others, or be constructive or destructive towards others? And ultimately, is it glorifying God And is it truly out of thought and consideration of other people, or is it more about your own personal rights? And so Paul understood. He was one that dealt with the legal authorities often, and they were often a shifting target as to what they expected of him. So he understands the challenges of responding to governmental leadership and to difficult situations that are based on different cultures, because he traveled everywhere. But yet, he made sure that everything he did was for the good of others and so that they would be saved, that the gospel would be advanced by how I lead my family, by how I lead this church, by how I lead my life, that it's going to benefit other people, the gospel gets moved forward, and it glorifies God in the way I go about it. So hopefully this text can serve as a principle to you to ask the questions on how to lead your own household, as to whether your freedoms, you want to choose to use those freedoms in a manner that is different, but you can say, you know what, this will be constructive, this will be beneficial towards others, and it does not hinder the gospel, it does glorify God. I think if you ask yourself those questions with authenticity and sincerity, I believe God will guide you. And then pray, ask for him to guide you. It says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 that the spiritual person will pray about all things and make spiritual discernment or judgment about all things. So when you're asking yourselves these questions, go before the Lord and ask for help and guidance. And I believe the Spirit will guide the spiritual person into all things. And then these questions can help you maybe take away some of the gray. So hopefully this helps you in some of the things you might be considering right now for your household. And what I love about Scripture is it's always relevant, regardless of context of time. So find this as refreshing to your soul, and may it serve as that deep meat that is often talked about that is beyond the milk. God bless, and again, we hope to see you in the near future.